Hello everyone and welcome to the Age Group Triathlon podcast. My name is Simon Olney, I'm a professional triathlon coach, and in this week's episode I'm going to be helping you understand what it takes to go under 10 hours for an Ironman. Now, a lot of my content tends to be more sort of beginner friendly because I feel there is a real gap in the market for pragmatic advice for beginners, people who are completely new to the sport. However, I do still have the knowledge and the experience with the more high-end performance side of things. So I wanted to share this episode for two groups of people mainly. First of all, for those who are close to going under 10 hours themselves, people who have gone sub 11, and they're thinking, I just need to get that bit closer to going under 10 hours. Alternatively, it could be people who are training for their first Ironman or just curious about Ironman, and they're wondering, what does it actually really take to achieve these superhuman times? So, whether you are someone who is targeting this as a event, as a goal, or whether you are somebody who's simply curious about performance and Ironman in general, I'm going to break down the kind of qualities that you need to have to go under 10 hours, the kind of support that you're probably going to need in place, the main sessions that you're going to want to be doing, as well as some general pointers and advice on how to approach Ironman training between being a sort of a completer and a completer. Now, to start with, I wanted to touch on sort of referring to the support network, really, I think. And I wanted to point out just the level of sort of privilege in life, really, that is required to go under 10 hours for an Ironman. That it is such a demand on your time that you need to have not only an excellent support network around you of friends and family, which I think a lot of us, I consider myself to have that. I think a lot of us take that for granted. I've definitely worked with athletes in the past who have had a more difficult relationship between their training and their family. But also having the disposable income that is required to be able to go under 10 hours. Now, if you are training for an Ironman, the entry fees are expensive. There's no denying that. But if a race is relatively local to you, if you can get by mainly on second-hand equipment, then you could get that first Ironman finish done somewhere, I guess, between sort of the £1,000 and £2,000 mark, I think. Depending on just how frugal you are, depending on just how much you can beg, borrow and steal. Don't steal stuff, but you know what I mean. If you be incredibly frugal, you can get it done on a real budget. By the time that you're looking to go under 10 hours, by the time you have a real target like this, the amount that you need to invest in equipment, the various additional costs associated with high performance as opposed to just getting the medal, is a real step up. Now, I don't want you to think that you have to be within the top 1% of earners to be able to finish this. You don't have to be. It could be that you have a dual income in the household. It could be that you sort of come from a family where you just have, some wealth in the family and it's distributed around. But I guess the reason I'm mentioning this is because if you are looking to complete triathlon on a complete shoestring, then you are going to find yourself very handicapped if you're looking to achieve a goal such as sub 10 hours over an Ironman. If you're having to work multiple jobs, long hours, just because of sort of the hourly pay that you get, if you can't afford to get yourself a time trial bike and some nice aero equipment, good wheels, then you are going to be fighting with one hand behind your back. Can it still be done? Yes, absolutely, of course it can. But I just wanted to mention this at the start because, triathlon, it's not a cheap sport, especially when you start looking right towards the pointy end of things. So, before we get stuck in, I am going to be talking about bits of equipment. I'm going to be making recommendations that are going to be on the pricier end of things. Because a lot of people looking to go under 10 hours, they'll have the disposable income. Oh yeah, sure, I'll get that bike. I'll get that, I'll book that lab test. I'll do whatever it is because my goal is to go under 10 hours. And they may well have a budget well in excess of sort of 20 grand to be able to dedicate to this project. And I'm also going to come across being a bit hypocritical because I'm going to recommend things that I will have told people in previous episodes not to bother with, not to worry about. Because if we are chasing this high-end performance, then we really do need to be exhausting all of our options. Do you need all of the things that I recommend? No, absolutely not. But I am going to be talking about bits of equipment, sort of marginal gains, because I know somebody who lives locally to me who I've done gave him some swim coaching for a couple of years. And over the last 3 years, he's come within, I think, 5 minutes of going under 10 hours at Challenge Roth, and he just can't seem to manage to duck under that 10-hour mark. And for him, he is going to have to be looking at those marginal gains. So I am going to be talking about all of these here. You do not need all of them, but I'm going to be covering them nonetheless. So if you are somebody looking to achieve this goal, keep your ears peeled. I'm going to be sharing some insights with you. If you're just starting out, if you just sort of curious, just starting out an Ironman, just because I mentioned something in this episode does not mean that it's an essential. And finally, I wanted to touch on age. Obviously, going under 10 hours is a high performance goal. And it's understandable a lot of people may think, oh, back in my day I could have. But I know people in their 50s who've gone under 10 hours. I don't know what the actual age record is for the oldest sub 10 Ironman finisher. But I imagine sort of into their 60s, some people have probably achieved that. As we get older, we start to lose muscle mass, we start to lose aerobic capacity. There are lots of different contributors to declining performance. However, depending on how well that you trained in sort of your 20s and 30s, you may even be able to continue to improve throughout your 40s and 50s. So if somebody was an Olympian, if somebody was a professional triathlete when they were much younger, they're not going to get any faster into their 40s. But most of us, we're nowhere close to our potential. So I want you to keep a bit of an open mind. If you're just sort of curious about this, I wonder if I can do it, that you're not necessarily too old just because you're in your 50s. Is it going to be harder? Yeah, I'll be honest, it will be harder. But if you have several years of training behind you, it might actually be easier than for a very athletic 20-something, which I get into detail later in the episode. Now, one of the first questions I think a lot of people will have is how many hours a week in training does it take to go under 10 hours? And that's almost the wrong question to ask. I mean, it's a perfectly valid question to ask. If somebody wants to start on this journey, if somebody wants to go sub 10, then they need to ask themselves, okay, do I have the hours in the day? If you've got a busy job, young family, do you have the hours required to be able to put in this time, achieve this challenge? Yeah, valid question. But I think the more important question is, how long have you been doing triathlon for? Because I'd like to think of aerobic fitness as being like house prices. If you buy a house, by the time that you sell it, it will have gone up in value. Now, over the time that you own that house, there will be periods of economic hardship when the house is actually worth less than you bought it for. You find yourself in negative equity. It's not a good place to be. But as long as you don't sell it there and then, in a year or two, that value will increase. So the value will jump up and down a little bit. It'll drop, it'll increase, it'll drop, it'll increase. But the trend, if you look at all house price trends, they always increase over sort of a 10, 15, 20 year period. That will increase. And the same is true of aerobic fitness. If you are training consistently for 2 years, as opposed to 10 years, the athlete who's been training consistently for 10 years will be much aerobically fitter than somebody who's been training consistently for 2 years. Now, that aerobic fitness, it will drop, it will increase over time. But the fact is, as long as you keep chipping away, the longer that you're doing this for, the fitter you will get and the faster you will get. Now, there are very few athletes out there who will be able to go around the 10-hour mark for their first triathlon in their first year. In their second year, equally unlikely, if you ask me. Now, it could be that someone has been doing triathlon for several years, and they decide that they're going to step up and they're going to attack the Ironman distance. And they may well end up doing very well. In fact, there was an athlete that I coached in his first Ironman. We did it in 10 hours and 12 minutes. The reason that we managed that, well, because we'd already been, racing 70.3. I think we'd been working together for about 2 years at that point. And he got a lot of history in marathon running. And we were already at high performance. He just extended that over to the Ironman distance and he put in a fantastic time. But these are the exception. And I see on Facebook groups a very high proportion of people who, they tend to be young, sort of 20-somethings. And there's a Facebook group called the Ironman Sub 10 Journey, I think it is. Or Sub 10 Ironman, something like that. If you stick Sub 10 Ironman into Facebook, you'll find the group. And it's useful to join. But, once every sort of month or so, there'll be somebody who I'd wager as being sort of early mid-20s who has decided they want to go sub 10. And they come across to me as being, somebody from a background who's used to getting the way they wanted in life, used to achieving what it is they set their mind out to do. Let's put it that way. And they seem to really underestimate the amount of work, the amount of time that goes into achieving this. Now, if you're in your 20s, then you're going to be able to run 5k and, sprint triathlons really a lot faster than people who were in their 50s. But when you're looking at Ironman, this is such a long game. And in fact, it's only quite recently that Ironman athletes, professionals, sort of in their sort of mid to late 20s, have been right at the forefront of the pack. Traditionally, it would be athletes in their 30s and into their 40s who would be at the front of affairs at Kona and other events. Now, part of that is due to a shift in the way that people approach triathlon as a sport. In years gone by, people would spend years racing sprints and then step up to Olympics and then middle distance and then Ironman. And they saw it as much more of like a long journey, with the Ironman being this long-term goal. Whereas now, I think, due to sort of shifts from generational mindsets, as well as what we see through social media, a lot of people go, right, my first race is going to be an Ironman because I've seen Ironman on Instagram and I want to have that medal, I want to have the title of Ironman. And you've heard me talk about this before if you're a regular listener. I don't think that's necessarily the best decision for longevity and long-term enjoyment in health and fitness, but you can do it if you want. And that's why I think that, you have people trying their arm at triathlon at a much younger age. Which is why you have these professionals who are putting in these fantastic times. But even these pros, by the time they get their pro card, they will have been racing for sort of 2 or 3 years, I'm pretty sure. Sorry for the very long run in there. I just feel that it's important to frame this episode and the advice that I'm going to be giving to help understand, make sure that people are going into this with their eyes wide open and that they don't start this very time-consuming, demanding journey without the prerequisites to really be successful. So let's get started. And to start with, I'm going to look at swimming. We're going to go through the sports in order and then we look at some of the supporting habits. So, when we're looking at swimming, the number one thing you can do to improve your stroke is to have regular swim video analysis with a swim coach. And when I say regular, well, it's going to depend on how good you are at swimming. I remember I, hadn't had a video analysis in some time, and I used to run some sessions at a local pool. And there was a coach who would run sessions at the same time as me, and I got in the pool and I started sort of doing a warm-up, and I noticed he was packing away his stuff still, and I said, look, would you mind just giving my swim stroke a look? Because from what I understand, I've got a very good swim stroke. And so he goes, yeah, sure, swim a 50 and I'll have a look. So, right, thank you, I really appreciate that. So, swam 50 metres, really focusing on my technique. And I finished and he goes, yeah, looks really good to me. But if I was to pick one thing out, again, he just saw me swim 50 metres. It's not like I had underwater cameras. Just using his eyes, but as a very experienced coach, he said, you're probably not pushing all the way back at the end of your stroke. You put your hands probably exiting the water a little bit early. I go, thank you, that's really helpful. That is something that I know in the past that, I've struggled with, so I can focus on that. You're never too good, you're never too experienced to be able to get a video analysis, because not only do we get sloppy, but our stroke changes, our habits change. You know, if you start to lack mobility in some areas, if you have focused on one area of your stroke and let something else sort of go, it is important to get somebody to look over your stroke. If you are a very new athlete, a new swimmer, there might be mileage in going back every sort of 3 months or so. Whereas if you're an experienced triathlete, which if you're looking to go sub 10, you probably are, you might only need something sort of every 6 months, or you might have the budget and the means to go back every month. I've definitely worked with athletes before who have found a coach who does his like an endless pool and does video analysis, and they go along and they get their stroke filmed, and they will go back every month, and the coach will give them sort of some sessions to do, and I go, okay, like, you know, I am not as good a swim coach as this standalone coach is, so if this is what the swim coach thinks we should be doing, sure, I'm going to trust him, and we're going to do that. And there's that cooperation. I've been along, and I've been along to the video analysis sessions, and I've chatted with the coach, and we kind of share ideas about the way to improve their swimming. Because I don't think coaching should be about ego; it should be about cooperation. You know, working for what's best for the athlete. I do my own sort of video analysis, where if somebody sends me a video, I'll be able to analyse their stroke. But to be honest, it's not at the same level as them, because not only are we not getting the stroke from underwater and all the different angles that we maybe want to, but also, you know, I'm just not as good a swim coach as them. However, the difference being that a video swim session analysis in an endless pool, these days you're going to be looking at sort of £120, I think, maybe more in London for that session. Whereas I charge £40 because I'm just sort of analysing a handful of videos that somebody sends to me over email. If you're interested in that, drop me an email. It's down in the show notes. But it is very different. If you really want to excel, getting to an in-person swim coach for a one-to-one stroke analysis is really important. Turning up to the local club and getting sort of your sort of level 1, level 2 coach to give you some stroke feedback is great. It's useful, and for a lot of people, that's all they realistically need. But if we want to go sub 10, then we really need to get our stroke the best that it can be. Now, technique is massive. It really is. Especially if you're going to be racing somewhere where there's a decent possibility it could be a non-wetsuit swim. Now, a non-wetsuit swim isn't ideal because it will be slower than a wetsuit swim. So we could immediately be giving away sort of 5, maybe 10 minutes, sometimes more, in the swim if you're looking at a non-wetsuit swim. But if everything else about the course really suits you, you're just going to have to step up. You're just going to have to up your game in the swim. You're going to have to give it a bit more focus to be able to help make sure that you are getting the best out of all 3 disciplines. And that's because the wetsuit covers a multitude of sins, and I include myself in that statement. That it helps lift you up in the water, makes you more hydrodynamic. There's an awful lot that will make you faster about having a wetsuit, and I do recommend that if you're looking to go under 10 hours, that you do invest in a good wetsuit, because having that additional mobility in the shoulders by having those nice thin shoulders, 1.5 millimeter in the shoulders, hopefully, having a good buoyancy throughout, or if you are an accomplished swimmer, getting a good wetsuit that's sort of a 4-4 buoyancy split, where it isn't going to lift you out of the water as much. Again, this is money well spent, because it could save you precious minutes. You know what I was talking about? The guy that I know who lives locally struggles to go under 10 hours at Roth. Well, there is a chance that a good wetsuit could save you a minute or 2 in the swim relative to sort of a middle of the range wetsuit. So again, if you're looking for these marginal gains, we do need to look at having a top end wetsuit. But if we are going to be swimming where it's non-wetsuit, it's even more critical that our technique is as good as it can be. Now, technique it's hard to overemphasize how important it is for swimming. You don't need me to tell you that. But what is underestimated in swimming is just how much value there is in swimming 4-kilometre swim sets regularly. Putting in really big shifts, putting in really big sessions in the pool with lots of intensity in there. And the reason for this is that the fatigue that we gain from swimming is much less than cycling and especially running. So we can afford to fit a bit more intensity in our swimming. But what about the 80-20 rule? What about polarised training? What about this? When you're looking to go sub 10, I'm not saying you need to throw these out of the window. It's not what I'm saying at all. But we need to learn to be a lot more flexible. Look, if you read a book and it tells you this is the way to train, that's great. If somebody wants to do their first Ironman, get around 12 hours. If somebody wants to shed their bad habits, if somebody wants to train in a more mindful way, a lot of the tips that I give away on this podcast, not too dissimilar. But if you are looking to really come close to your potential, then we need to step away from these. We need to take the stabilizers off of the bike. We need to step away from the handrail. We need to learn to think for ourselves, and we need to look outside of these restrictive rules. And if we can swim hard without feeling battered the next day, well, why wouldn't we make sure that we're capitalising on that? I know that I've worked with some athletes who say, well, swimming almost feels like a rest day for me, And I think, okay, well, we can capitalise on that. We can swim longer, assuming the athlete has the time. We can swim harder. There's a lot that we can do to really help to increase our performance in swimming. That isn't just, well, we need to make sure that we're doing all of our swimming in zone 2 because that's what this book says. If we're looking to go sub 10, we do need to expand our horizons a little bit. We do need to ask ourselves what works. We do need to try new things. And this one can be a multi-year project to go sub 10 because there is this trial and error that comes with it. Now, many triathletes, they will swim 3 or 4 times a week. And if you're looking to go under 10 hours, you probably need to be looking at this. I'd say that probably 5 days a week is probably a little bit excessive for an age group athlete. But, I think that for a dedicated age grouper, 4 swims a week is pretty good, pretty average. How would you break those swims up? Well, you probably have one technique set, one set that was more steady volume, and 2 harder swims in there. Whether that is VO2, sprints, threshold, again, you mix it up from week to week. But it is really critical to make sure that we are getting a good volume in with our swimming. Because if we want to go sub 10, then we want to be as close to an hour in the water as we can get. A lot of age groupers go closer to 55 minutes. Now, the difference between 55 minutes, an hour, and an hour and 10 minutes doesn't sound like much over the course of an Ironman. And I frequently tell people on this podcast not to sweat these differences. But if we are looking to go under 10 hours, that 10 minutes difference suddenly becomes massive because it could well be the difference between you going under 10 hours or not. I mean, imagine if somebody offered you 10 minutes off of your marathon time. You bite their arm off. When it comes to the swim, people just kind of shrug off and go, oh, well, it's a swim, isn't it, Well, no, the swim can be free time. Yes, it can take a lot of time in the water to see relatively incremental changes. But we need to keep chipping away. We need to keep improving if we want to go under 10 hours. We've also got to get really specific with our swim training. And that means that once the lakes open, we get in the lakes and we are swimming 4K, 5K, 6K. We're putting in some really long open water swims. Ideally, if you can get a group together and you can swim 4K in a group in close confines with other athletes so that you're not freaking out, so that you know how to keep some space around you in the water, get used to turning buoys together, this is going to be incredibly useful to you. Pool training, it's great. You need to keep pool training all year round. But assuming you don't live 2 hours drive from an open water venue, you really do need to get weekly open water swims in to make sure that you're ready for the demands of the Ironman swim. If you can confidently sit there on the racing line in a pack, taking the shortest line round the course, knowing that you're keeping space around you and unlikely to get hit, It's going to do wonders for your confidence, and it's going to do wonders for your swim time as well. I would recommend, if you are that way inclined and you're swimming sort of 4 times a week, to join a group session for at least one of those to help just, push yourself that little bit harder than you might be able to in your own training. If you have, a coach on poolside for encouragement, if you have other swimmers who you're trying to match pace with, keep up, beat, it does just add that extra bit of stimulus to your training. Of course, if it isn't for you, if the timings don't work out, if you just don't enjoy it, again, I'm not saying you have to do it, but it is definitely something that I would consider. Or you can get a group of people together who all have a similar ability, and you go and you swim regularly as a group. This can really help. Now I'm going to move on to the sexy stuff that a lot of you have come from. Let's talk about the bike. Okay? Let's talk about how it is that we're going to be able to put together the best bike split possible. Now, at this point, we need to start looking at how we are going to go under 10 hours. What does the maths look like? Well, if we look at a swim, and I'm going to say most people are going to be going sub 10. They're going to be somewhere around an hour. That it could be they're a little bit slower. I know somebody who's gone, I think, 9:15 and they swam 1 hour 15. So it can be done if you're a slower swimmer, but again, you're giving away time. So I recommend, I'm going to, for the sake of calculations, say around about an hour. Now, some people will be faster. That's great. You've got some extra time. Around about an hour for the swim. And then when we get to transition, I'm going to say 10 minutes. Now, it could well be that you are a lot faster. It could well be that you are significantly slower. It's going to depend on the length of the run from the swim out to the transition. It's going to depend on how far you have to run with your bike. There are a lot of factors that can affect somebody's transition time. But I'm going to say, by the time that you start the bike, you're probably going to be an hour and 10 minutes into the race. And I'm also going to allow, for the sake of this calculation, 10 minutes for transition 2. Again, could be shorter, could be a bit longer. As a transition, it's a lot quicker to to just get your running shoes on rather than sort of moving the wetsuit and all that. But I'm going to be generous and say 10 minutes because I'd much rather say, look, it's going to be 10 minutes and say you might be able to get it done in 5 if you end up doing it in 8 and you see all the calculations that you've made start to fall apart. So now that we've accounted for 1 hour and 20 minutes, that leaves us 8 hours and 40 minutes to complete the bike and the run. Now, how we split this up is going to be completely up to you because it's going to depend on your strengths, it's going to depend on your weaknesses, it's going to depend on the course. Now, course selection is an incredibly important part of going sub 10 because you want to make sure that you're picking a course which has a swim that you know that you'll be fast and efficient in. Ocean swims, probably not the best choice because the conditions can really conspire against you and you can end up losing valuable time in the water if you're getting thrown about a bit, start swallowing seawater, and that can have an effect on your sort of nutrition management later in the event as well. So a freshwater swim is probably ideal. And you really want to be looking for, quite simply, sort of a relatively flat, maybe a rolling course for you to be able to attack the bike on. Now, the downside with a completely pan-flat course is that it can get very windy. Especially in parts of the world where you don't tend to have sort of hedgerows along the sides of the road like we tend to in some areas in Europe. If the bike course is very exposed, as a lot of roads are in the US, then you don't have the hill to contend with, but you can have gusting crosswinds, headwinds. This can all cause problems. So when you are looking for a target race, do keep in mind this and have a look. Jump on Google, have a look on Slow Twitch, which is a forum if you're not aware, Facebook groups for different races, and try to get an idea of what the weather has been like in previous years. The closer a race is towards the end of the season or the earlier in the season races, the more a race is likely to be sort of windy and difficult conditions. Whereas in the summer, it's likely to be a bit sort of stiller. You're not going to have as much in the way of wind, but of course it will be hotter as a result. So if you're an athlete who doesn't do well in the heat, that's going to really work against you as well. So there are a huge amount of considerations to make. You can't simply go, oh, okay, well, I'll just sign up for the closest race if I want to go sub 10, because we are trying to really optimize our performance here, and having the ability to be able to go under that sort of that 10-hour mark is going to be largely down to the course. If you go and you take on a course like 10B, and you want to go under 10 hours there, you're making life an awful lot harder for yourself. So if we are looking at sort of say, oh, well, a 6-hour bike split, that's going to give us 2 hours and 40 minutes to run the marathon. I don't think that's going to work, if I'm honest. I think that you'd have to be an exceptional marathon runner to be able to pull that off. Realistically, you're going to be wanting to look at around about 5.5 hours for the bike, I think, at a minimum, to give you enough leeway to be still a very strong marathon runner. But to be able to knock out that time. But you probably, if we are looking to be able to put in that sort of 3:20 time for an Ironman marathon, we're probably going to want to be close to around, well, potentially to be able to be put in a 3-hour marathon if we are on our best day on the road. Now, I'm not suggesting that you go out and you train for a marathon, see if you can go sub 3, just to see if you can run 3:20 on Ironman day. That's not what I'm suggesting. But if you are holding that kind of 4:20 per kilometre pace that you need to roughly be around that 3-hour mark, and you're holding it for your long runs and you feel pretty good, that's a relatively good sign that on the day itself, that you'll be able to knock out that sort of that 3:20. Now, some people may go, oh, you know what? I think sort of 3:10. A 20-minute drop off between a road marathon and an Ironman marathon is too much. A 10-minute drop off is more achievable. But I would always much rather be conservative with the estimates that I give athletes and the targets that we set ourselves. Because at the end of the day, if somebody comes across the line in 9:50, that's great. I'm over the moon for them because we were conservative with our estimates. What I don't want to do is say, oh, you know what, you can just allow sort of like your Ironman marathon and probably be 10 minutes slower than you'd be capable of on a standalone race, and they end up being 20 minutes slower and they end up coming in 10 minutes over their time. That's just how I am. I'd much rather be honest with people and work these things out, and be a little bit overly cautious than just be blindly optimistic and really hype them up for them to then have a really disappointing result. Now, for most people looking to go sub 10, we're going to be looking around 5 to 5.5 hours for the bike, somewhere around there. Now, if we can get below that, that'd be absolutely fantastic. But I think that this is, 5.5 for most people is going to be the sort of the slowest bike they can afford to get away with. But how is it that we can work out what kind of bike split is achievable for us? Well, I use a tool called Best Bike Split. And if you haven't come across it, and you're looking to go sub 10 this year, it is essential that you either work with a coach like me who has access to that, or you buy your own subscription. Because it's going to allow you to be able to work out exactly what level of fitness is required, what target power numbers are required for you to be able to achieve your bike split. Now, the way it works is we upload onto Best Bike Split information about ourselves. We drag and drop, upload a GPX file of the course onto Best Bike Split, and we update it with as much information about our bike as possible. And it's got a really neat feature where you can take your bike out. It could be a time trial that you race, it could be a triathlon, it could be that you just do a standalone test. But you go out with your bike with a power meter attached, and you go out and you race, you ride hard. Ideally around that sort of 10-mile mark. And what Best Bike Split then does is it looks at that file and it goes, okay, so you put out this much power. you weigh this much, your bike weighs this much, the weather conditions were this, there was this much wind, the air pressure was this. What it does with that data, assuming that the data is of good quality, so you're not sort of coasting, there aren't dropouts, all of that, then it will go, okay, we believe that your bike, well, your setup, I should say, rather than your bike, your setup creates this much drag. And it will give you a drag coefficient number, which is incredibly useful because using that will allow you to calculate how much drag you'll be creating over your Ironman. And we can then take this drag coefficient number, we can upload it, and we can say, okay, best bike split, please make me a bike plan. Here is me, here is my FTP, here is the course that I'm going to be riding, here is the drag coefficient, here is how much my setup weighs. What time am I going to be able to complete the bike in? And not only does it take into account the GPX file, it also takes into account the weather. So this only really becomes useful when you get sort of a few days out from the race. Normally around about 48 hours from the race is when I'll rerun the numbers for an athlete of mine, and we'll be able to work out, right, okay, so how is it we can really sort of change our plan if needs be? Do we have to realign our expectations based on the weather? Because none of us are in control of the weather. And if the weather is especially bad, and it's especially windy, and it looks like we're going to end up losing a lot more time than we thought, do we need to reassess our priorities? Do we need to reassess our pacing strategy? That's a conversation that I need to have with the athlete as an individual. But the great thing is it comes out and it goes, okay, based on all of this data, here is your bike split. And that is based on the intensity factor that I input as being a target. And that's going to depend on a number of factors, really. So we have to take into account somebody's sort of relative strengths, how long somebody's going to be out on the bike course for. All of this will really depend. If I am coaching a first-time Ironman athlete, our intensity factor, which is a percentage of FTP that you're going to be riding at, it's probably going to be somewhere around 60, maybe 65%, okay? Because they're going to be out there for a lot longer on the bike than a sort of a more competitive athlete. However, if we are looking at coming in around that kind of that 5.5 hour mark, we don't really want our intensity factor to be any higher than the low 70s, I think. I think by the time that we start looking towards 75, I mean, as a reference point, a lot of 70.3 athletes, so that the very top end athletes who are going to be out there for about 2 hours, they normally target somewhere between 0.8 and 0.85 for their intensity factor. Sometimes it does depend on how accurate an FTP is. I once saw a professional athlete bragging they had an intensity factor of 0.91 on the 70.3 bike, which did just make me think, yeah, I think your FTP might be a bit low more than anything else, but that's by the by. But for an Ironman athlete, we don't really want to be going above 75, I don't think. Again, there may be some people who, again, their FTP might be a little bit low. They might not test especially well. Their FTP might be a bit low, and they might be able to achieve and sort of hold that. And they may be able to ride an intensity factor of 0.75 and think to themselves, you know what? I think I can do this for an Ironman. And if you've done a few Ironmans, if you have that experience, then I'm not going to tell you that's wrong. But what we want to gain, like being conservative with our planning for this, I would love for an athlete to be able to ride the Ironman bike an intensity factor of around 0.7. And some people could say, well, why would you want them to ride at 0.7 when they could ride at 0.75? They'd be faster. Yeah, they probably would. But if you put input into best bike split, what the time difference would be between 0.7 and 0.75, chances are it's not going to be massive. I mean, I guess like over the course of a sort of a sub 10 Ironman, the difference could be pronounced. It could end up being sort of around 10, maybe 15 minutes. I think that might be towards the upper end. But again, depending on the course. Yeah, that is still notable. But if you can make up sort of 20 minutes on the run by being 10 minutes slower on the bike, I mean, come on. You know, like, you have to look at the bigger picture here. I'd much rather that somebody comes off of the bike having completed the bike at like 70% of the FTP and coming around that, like 5:20 mark, then somebody comes off in 5:10, having ridden harder, but with tired legs going into the marathon. Okay, we do need to like really zoom out, look at the big picture, see what it is that we're capable of. Now, what if you open at Best Bike Split, or you work with me, you get my race planning consultation, and you open it and you put all your numbers in, and you go, okay, well, if I'm at 70% of FTP, but Best Bike Split thinks that I'm going to be 6 hours and 10 minutes. That's no good. What do I do? Well, you train more. You get fitter. You're not ready. I'm sorry. But there's no other way to put it. If you are putting your numbers into Best Bike Split and they're not coming up with the times that you want, you don't solve that by increasing the intensity factor. By going, okay, well, I guess I'm just going to have to target 0.77 to be able to get under that. No, that's completely the wrong way to approach it. You'll probably start blowing up towards the end of the bike, and you will have a terrible marathon. You're just not ready. You need more training. You need another year of training. You need more aerobic fitness. You need a higher FTP. Now, as an athlete, I'm at 4.7 watts per kilo at FTP. A lot of you, especially those who are sort of on Zwift and who will sort of understand sort of watts per kilo, they go, wow, that's punchy. That is dangerous. Like, I wouldn't want to end up in a race against you. Well, the issue is, my FTP is only 260 watts because I'm a lighter athlete. The result of this is that my FTP, it just isn't high enough for me to be able to put in a sub 10 hour bike split at the moment. I would need to increase my FTP for me to be able to hold the kind of power that I'd need to get around a bike course in 10 hours. Now, I don't think I've come close to my ceiling of FTP, honestly. I think there's a lot that I could do to raise that. I think I could probably get it into sort of well into the 5 watts per kilo range. I'm just a light athlete. It's just sort of what comes naturally to me. There is definite room for improvement there. But at the moment, I'm just not ready. I need a higher FTP. And that's what athletes need if they want to be able to ride at a low intensity factor, is rather than focusing on sort of stretching out, riding at a higher intensity, it's getting fitter, putting in the base fitness, putting in the hard work to be able to ride at a lower intensity on the bike. You hear people talk about, in my next race, I'm going to target this wattage. I'm going to target 300 watts. I'm going to target 280 watts. I'm really going to push it myself. But you hear a lot of people who are the fastest Ironman athletes. I mean, I hear them people interview them on podcasts, and they go, I don't want to find out how to increase my race power by 10 watts. I want to decrease my race power by 10 watts. I want to be as efficient as possible. And that's where not only having a higher FTP comes in, but also aerodynamics. Now, I'm not going to teach you how to suck eggs here. If you're listening to this podcast, if you are interested in Ironman performance, you understand the importance of aerodynamics. But it really is a case of optimizing your aerodynamic setup to be able to help ensure that you are achieving the best split possible. And there is more to this than simply throwing money at the problem. And that's because we're all different. We all have different frames. We all have different levels of mobility and strength. And when we are trying to optimize our aerodynamics, we need to choose one of 3 methods to be able to help us dial in and find the most efficient setup for us. Now, before we do aerodynamic testing, we really get into the weeds of this, we first need to get ourselves a performance bike fit. And this is not a case of going down to your local bike shop and slinging them £100 to have a look at your position. Okay, this is a case of going to a sort of somebody who ideally is a triathlon coach and a bike fitter, and who you are going to be paying a lot of money to, who are in the region of sort of £300-400, I imagine, who is going to help you find a blend of performance and comfort. Because comfort is actually really important. Because if you're not comfortable on the bike, then you can't perform. If you're shifting around in the saddle, if you are finding yourself with such restriction in your back that you have to keep sitting up and rolling your neck and stretching yourself out, okay, you are losing any gains that you could have from being in an aggressive position. And simply getting yourself as low and narrow as possible is not the answer. If you look at the very fastest triathletes and time trialists in the world who will work with the top aerodynamicists, the top bike fitters, and you look at the variations in their position, you'd be surprised. There's a great photo, or if you look at any sort of team pursuit sort of cycling squad, they all are riding sort of time trial position on the velodrome. Most teams, you look at them and you will see a real variation in their positions. And this is because we're all individuals. And a lot of people think, oh, well, you want to get as low as possible. You want to get as narrow as possible. That is the way to do it. Well, it's a mixture of biomechanics. It's a mixture of how our body works. Like, how low can we get without causing restriction, which is going to depend on things such as the length of somebody's back, for instance, as well as their frame and how air flows around them in their frame. If somebody is stockier, if somebody is skinnier, this is going to have an impact on the aerodynamics. And you can bet that if you're looking at the Olympic team pursuit squad on the track, or time trialists at the Tour de France, that they have dotted every I and they have crossed every T. And yet there is still variation in those positions. So how do we find the right position for us? Well, we get a bike fit, and that is the first place to start, because that is going to get us a good, I'd say, like 2/3 of the way there. If you go to a bike fitter who is used to working with high performance athletes, and you say, I want to go sub 10 over an Ironman, and I want you to help me get into the best position possible, they will give you, they will get you in a position that will get you sort of a good sort of 2/3, maybe 80% of the way there. And they will hopefully also give you some exercises to be completed to help improve your mobility on the bike, to allow you to hold this position for a prolonged time, and strength exercise as well. I cannot overstate how important it is for you to keep these exercises. I don't want you to just go, yeah, right, cheers mate, thank you, and walk out the door, there's my bike position, boom, I'm optimal, I'm dialed in. You will need those exercises to help you not only hold that position over the length of the Ironman, but also to allow you to make that position more aggressive over time. If you are if you start on this journey now and you're going to them for an initial bike fit, I would probably, if the budget allows, go back to them with about 3 months to go, 2-3 months to go, and say, you know, I've made these tweaks, I'll be doing these exercises, I want to see if there's anything that you can do. And it could be they do a follow-up fit for a more reasonable fee. Again, it depends on the bike fitter, it depends on their business model. But we want to ensure that we are staying on top of this. Now, between these bike fitting sessions, we are going to be working on making our position more aerodynamic. And this is the 3 ways that I've been referring to. So there are 3 ways we can do aero testing and check for improvements. The first one is the best bike split option, where you use best bike splits data and you will race the same time trial, try to keep the elevation the same, because we want to keep like for like as much as we possibly can. So we are attempting this time trial, and we do it if we are sort of testing different bits of equipment or positions, okay? We will go out and we will write this. Now, you really do need to give it a lot of data, and you do need to keep things as similar as you possibly can between runs. And the fact that these runs are going to be done at a high intensity does mean that you do need to be mindful of how often you do these. Because if we do them too much, then we end up to the point where we're including we have limited movement in our training for other things. If every other week then we're doing this aerodynamic testing run, then that can have an impact on sort of the riding surrounding it. So again, you have to make a decision. You have to come up with a schedule that works for you, and you have to ask yourself, well, what kind of gains can I expect to see for all this time invested? But you can then do these runs. So if you are trying to choose which helmet to use, for instance, if you've tried removing some spaces from the stem, if you're changing the position of the aero bars, whatever changes it is that you're making, and only change one thing at a time. You can go and you can do this, and you can do these runs, and it can give you a pretty clear idea, actually, of what's creating more drag. Because it may include, although it doesn't necessarily just look at the raw data, if you find yourself sort of riding in what should be a lower, more aggressive position, but you're creating more drag, it could be that you're just not able to sustain that position, that your neck is slightly higher, and you're having a knock-on effect to other areas of sort of your position as a result. So it does give you a really good real-world insight, and it also shows you how the upgrades that you're riding with interact with the environmental conditions around you. Because if you're taking out a set of wheels, and you want to see how they work, then there is no replacement for being out on the open road like you will be on race day to give you an insight into how those wheels perform. If this test is done on a quiet road, this is the ideal way to do it, because then you don't have to worry about turbulence from passing vehicles. You don't have to worry about sort of traffic and the like, or getting stuck behind something, for instance. So yeah, ideally find a quiet piece of road. It's the same one. Change things with your setup. Do multiple runs. Run them through best bike splits, aero analyzer tool, and decide what's best for you. The second option is if we go to a wind tunnel. Now these are very expensive. You can be looking at the best part of £1,000 sometimes, depending on the session and all of this. But to go along with your bike into a wind tunnel, and you set it up in the wind tunnel, and you sit and you pedal your bike, and they will take the drag data from the wind tunnel, and they go, okay, this creates this much drag. Let's try swapping out the helmet. Let's try swapping out the wheels. Let's try changing the tri-suit. Let's try changing the eyewear. Let's try changing the position. Let's see what is going to be the most efficient position for us. And what's really useful about this is that it allows you to change a number of things in isolation in succession. So if you go along with 4 different race suits that you want to try, you can put them all on and you can find out which one is going to be faster, which one is going to sit sort of best on you, your body, and sort of provide that data. And you can probably get all that data done in about 10 minutes, because there'll be people, sort of a couple of people who will be sat there on the sort of the control center, as it were. I don't know the proper term for it. Apologies if you work in a wind tunnel. I'm going to call it the control center. Why not? They'll be sat in a booth with a window, watching the cyclists, and they'll be getting the data in real time, and they'll be able to give you answers relatively quickly. And that's great, because unlike best bike split, where you need to head out and you need to be riding hard for about 20 minutes to get meaningful data, you can be riding for about sort of 30 seconds or so, get some decent data, and find out what it is that works for you. So it allows you to do a lot of changes in quick succession. It goes to the equipment available to you. You can try sort of narrowing your aero bars, raising them. It gives you a huge amount of data here. And it can really help you find a lot of sort of gains, really. I mean, imagine if you came away from a session in a wind tunnel and you'd found 15 watts of savings by making sure that you had the right setup of wheels, helmets, clothing, and position. 15 watts, imagine the training it would take to be able to add 15 watts onto your FTP. That's massive. And you can look at this from one of two ways. Either it means you can ride 15 watts faster, or you can ride 15 watts slower. Now, the final way to do aerodynamic testing is in a velodrome. And this is really quite useful because it's a blend of the two. The downside of using Best Bike Split and its error analyzer tool is that you're collecting field data, there are a lot of variables, and you need to do a lot of cycling to be able to get clean data. Because if you do a short run, then there's going to be so much noise, so many erroneous results, it's not going to be able to give you a clear answer. Whereas if you are in a wind tunnel, then you'll be able to get much faster answers. But the downside to the wind tunnel is that you are in an artificial environment, and how you're actually able, whether you're actually able to ride with that position, hold that position, corner with it, ride comfortably, that's a bit of more of an unknown. The velodrome is a mixture of those two, so you can ride laps around a velodrome, you can change things, you can get your aerodynamics tested, try different helmets. There's a huge amount that you can do there. And I can't pretend to understand exactly sort of the software and the setup for a velodrome aero testing sort of outfit is, but you will have an aerodynamicist, probably sort of a cycling coach, who will be there and will be able to help to advise you more than perhaps a wind tunnel team would. A wind tunnel team, they may also work with sort of racing teams and all these other motor racing, that is, all these other outfits, all these other industries, and they're there to help you as much as anything else collect the data, and then you can then sort of go over the data yourself and make your own decisions. Whereas at a velodrome, chances are you're going to be working in a more bike-specific environment with people who are then able better to look at your position and make suggestions. Now, most pros will use a mixture of wind tunnel and velodrome testing. They'll probably get that for free, or a sponsor will cover the cost in most cases. This is the top pros that I'm talking about here. If they do use Best Bike Split, then it may be that they use the error analyzer tool to analyze a race performance and see how it actually transferred into the real world. If they're training for sort of some big racing, they did a warm-up 70.3, they may sort of import the race data from that and see, okay, so what was my CDA actually in the real world? And they can use that data to inform decisions with their coaches. Now let's break aero down section by section. So let's start by looking at helmet. So there are three types of helmet you can get. You have a helmet that's focused on ventilation, which you'll generally use, I think it's called performance helmet, or at least it was when I was in the bike retail industry. Performance helmet, which is designed for comfort and for ventilation to help make sure that somebody is protected and comfortable riding in warm temperatures. Then you have your road aero helmet, which is quite similar to the road helmet, but it is more sculpted, there's less ventilation in it, and it is designed for speed. Which, if you are sat on the front of a group, if you're sprinting, becomes really important. And then at the end of it, you have a time trial helmet. And these are quite large helmets. They are sculpted entirely for aerodynamics, and they do look a little bit strange. They'll often have a visor at the front, which will help with the sort of give you a clear field of view. Also helps improve, or sort of reduce the drag created by the helmet. They tend to have a lot less ventilation than other helmets, so a lot of athletes who are racing in hot conditions may actually decide against going for a full aero helmet. Now, a full aero helmet is the fastest option. When you're looking at aero helmets, you have two options. You've either got short tail helmets or long tail helmets. In days gone by, long tail were definitely the way to go. These days, you don't really see any long tail helmets. I mean, I still race with mine because I got it back in the day from Specialized when they had an industry event. I got it for about 20 quid. And I can't justify sort of spending £250 on a slightly more modern aero helmet. At the moment anyway, but I probably should replace it. But the trend is that because so few retailers or manufacturers are selling long tail helmets, they're just out of fashion. The data doesn't support the additional weight, and the fact that if you have a long tail helmet, if you are not disciplined with your head position, if you start looking around, then you can actually start creating drag, because if that long tail isn't there in line with your back, then it is going to be creating drag. Over a shorter race, you should be absolutely fine. You can get down there, you can get low, you can get nailed. Over a longer distance, then you are going to be an awful lot sort of less dialed in, I guess. You're going to be sort of sat up, drinking, eating. There's a lot more variation over those races, and the sort of being in that position for that long, for that kind of five and a half hours, probably isn't realistic. And any benefits from having a long tail helmet, the data suggests these days, are offset by that moving around of the head. Now, while aero helmets are the out and out fastest helmets out there, road aero helmets have made massive inroads in the last 10 years. I don't think even were road aero helmets 10 years ago. And because there's been such an advancement in technology, the difference between a road aero helmet and an aero helmet are actually relatively small. However, they are notable if you're trying to go under 10 hours for an Ironman. So you'd have to have quite a strong case to use a road aero helmet over a full aero helmet. One of these, however, could be ventilation. If you are attending a very hot race, then you may really struggle with overheating, and you may go, look, I'm just going to take the aero penalty by taking the road helmet, because I know that it's going to just leave me feeling an awful lot better on the course. However, in the vast majority of cases, if you want to go under 10 hours, you need to be looking at a full aero helmet. Now, you can see all sorts of studies that will tell you sort of the fastest aero helmet, that they've done this testing. You could find videos on YouTube that will they take a series of aero helmets to the wind tunnel, and they test which one's the fastest. And having this data is definitely useful. It might help you eliminate a couple of options. But something else that's important is comfort, which does go beyond the ventilation, and it's about the shape of your head. This is something that I actually picked up a lot on during my time in working in cycling retail, is that a lot of helmets are designed for a lot of different types of heads. Now, the shop that I worked at, they sponsored a relatively, well-known cycling team. And this cycling team was sponsored by a brand. Again, sorry, I'm having to be very vague here because I don't want any of this coming back to me. They're sponsored by a brand who create helmets. And I would describe the shape of that brand's helmet as being unusual. And as a result, because they were all given this team kit, a lot of the riders actually had to carve out, they had to take a Stanley knife to the foam in the helmets. They had to carve out the foam to make the helmet fit their head comfortably. This is an absolute disaster when it comes to safety, let's be honest. You don't want to be putting protective material out of a helmet. But they had no choice, because the helmet didn't fit them. And we really didn't sell many of those helmets because of the sort of the shape of the head. Some people liked them because their heads fitted them. But I would always have every customer try on at least 2 helmets. No matter how much they love the first one, try this one on. Because I started to learn which brands were designed for a head that's slightly more rounded, and which are sort of made for a head sort of slightly more elongated, such as my own. And you try these and you find out what it is that fitted a person well. And the way you tested the helmet is put the helmet on the head, tighten it up, get the chin straps, as they should be, no more than 2 fingers fitting under the chin strap. And you rock the helmet from side to side on somebody's head. And how much that helmet moves gives you an indication of the fit. If it moves around a lot, it's no good. You want to make sure that, if the worst were to happen and you were to crash, that the helmet doesn't simply sort of shift into the wrong place. You want it to remain where it is. But equally, if the helmet did not move a millimetre when I did this, that's not a good sign either, because some force does need to dissipate through the helmet. Not a huge amount, but we do just want a little bit of movement from side to side. And so you do need to keep this in mind when you're looking at aero helmets. If an aero helmet is 2 watts faster, but is really uncomfortable on your head, it pinches and it doesn't offer great protection, is that really the best choice for you? You know, do you need to take into considerations of comfort, safety, all these other aspects? And again, just because in an aero tunnel, on that YouTube video that you watched, that helmet was 2 watts faster in that position, if your head position is slightly lower or slightly higher, that's probably going to affect the result as well. Lots of magazines, YouTube channels, social media, they like to go and like to give the top 5 the best products. You know what? Because people like spending money, they like brands in triathlon, they like to know what the fastest is. But the sort of the testing that they do is so flawed, and you never know what kind of money could be changing hands behind the scenes to help make sure the product comes out on top. There's a huge amount of variables here. So I really do encourage you not to buy into these videos, articles, to try things out for yourself and find what works best for you. At the very least, go to a bricks and mortar triathlon shop if it's at all possible. Try on a few helmets and find a helmet that fits you, that is comfortable. And of course, do a bit of preliminary research. Like I say, if you watch these videos and it turns out that one helmet is sort of 7 watts slower than the others, yeah, you probably don't want to be wearing that. But go into it with an open mind. Don't simply march down to your bike shop and go, I want to buy the helmet that did best in this testing that I watched. Moving on to wheels. Now, wheels are incredibly expensive. In some cases, you can end up spending as much on a set of wheels as you did on the bike frame itself, which feels insane. But there is a triangle in the world of cycling. Okay, so you have cheap, you have strong, you have light. And you can choose 2 of those. So it can be strong and light, but it can't be cheap. It can be strong and cheap, but it won't be light. Okay, so you have to choose 2 of these. And when we're looking at wheels, then the strength aspect is really important. Because when we're looking at aerodynamic wheels, they have much less spokes in than other wheels. If you have a cheaper wheel, it's going to have a lot of spokes in it, which is going to make it nice and strong, but it's going to create a lot of turbulence. If you look at some aerodynamic wheels, they might only have sort of a handful of spokes in them, and they may be bladed spokes, which aren't maybe as structurally sound as other spokes. And as a result, these wheels are much more prone to buckling. So they have to use a very sort of careful and mindful approach, using the best materials and the best methods to make sure that that wheel is not only going to be light and aerodynamic, but when you hit a pothole, it's going to do everything it can to reduce the chance of it buckling. And good, well-respected wheel manufacturers will put their wheels through a huge amount of stress tests before they ship them, because it's in their interest. They can't afford to have people on social media going, my bike wheel disintegrated on a descent and it's knocked my teeth out. Okay, that's not going to work. So we need to make sure that when we are looking at buying wheels, that we don't go for the cheap knockoffs that you can find online. Okay, it's just not worth it. My recommendation, if you can't afford to get those top end wheels, is to get something that's from a known brand that isn't quite as fast. Because the difference between the absolute top end wheels and the ones that are a bit cheaper, it's probably only going to be a handful of minutes, 2 or 3 minutes over an Ironman, I imagine. It's really not going to add up to an awful lot. So I can't tell you what to do, but for me, the safety risk of going for cheap counterfeit wheels, it just doesn't add up for me. Now, when you look at wheels, the depth of the wheel is going to influence how aerodynamic that wheel is. Now, a disc wheel is relatively standard for high performance athletes on a bike. So it's a complete disc on the back, and as a result, the air flows completely round the wheel rather than getting disrupted by the spokes over the rear. And this is broadly, adopted by everyone as sort of the fastest option, really. With it being on the rear wheel, if a gust catches that rear wheel, then that wheel acts a bit like a sail, okay? But because you are sat, your weight will be more over the rear wheel, you shouldn't get blown about nearly as much. If you were to have a disc on the front wheel, which I don't think is legal in most races, I mean, maybe it's just that nobody does it because they're not that daft. If you have a gust that hits your front wheel and your rear wheel, then you are getting blown into a ditch. And even if you are in a velodrome, which is a completely sort of artificial environment with no wind whatsoever, that bike is going to handle like a bag of nails if you've got a front disc and a rear disc. So having a front and rear disc isn't done, really. The rear disc is a staple, whereas on the front we are going to be looking at sort of a deeper rimmed wheel, but not a full disc. Now, the reference that I made earlier about that the wind hitting the bike and acting a bit like a sail, well, this is sort of what sets really good wheels apart from wheels that aren't so good, which is how they react when the wind hits them at different angles. Because it's very, very rare that you'll find yourself riding straight into a headwind at 0 degrees. Chances are that headwind is going to be hitting you from the side a little bit. And how the wheel reacts to being hit at different yaw angles, which is the term that we use to describe this, is going to have a large influence on the aerodynamics. Because if a wheel is well designed, when the wind hits it, then it can act like, the wheel can act like a little bit of a sail. It can end up sort of pushing you forward, making you a little bit faster. And this comes down to the design, it comes down to the material, it comes down to the surfaces. Honestly, I don't understand it super well. But if you are looking at the top end wheels, not only are they going to perform better at different yaw angles, they're also going to be lighter, they're also going to be stronger. This is going to come at price, I will be honest. But depending on how important this sub 10 time is to you, it could end up being the difference between achieving your goals or not. However, as far as triathlon upgrades go, they probably do provide you with one of the lowest returns on investment of all the things you can invest in. So do keep that in mind. So I didn't have this in my notes when I started recording this, but I'm going to touch on tyres actually. Now, the tyre choice that you make is massive. However, we do need to balance performance with reliability. If you are aiming for a 10-hour Ironman and you get a puncture, there's a good chance that could be goodbye to your goal. Again, not necessarily. If you are very proficient, you could have a flat repaired and fully inflated within 2 or 3 minutes of stopping at the side of the road. But we want to do everything that we can to avoid punctures, and this means that we have to find a balance between performance and between puncture protection. So I recommend against going for the lightest tyre that you can find with the lowest rolling resistance and going all in, especially if you combine that with a very lightweight inner tube. Yes, you can end up saving yourself a few watts there, but the risk of puncture is just too high. If it was a sprint triathlon, if it's a time trial, sure, get yourself those really lightweight tyres, and if you puncture, you puncture, that's it, game over, you roll the dice. But for an Ironman, when you consider all the time and money invested in this one day, to run the risk of punctures, it just doesn't add up for me. So I'm going to highly recommend that you get yourself a very top end tyre, but that you don't go for the absolute lightest, most performance orientated tyre they have. Go for the one below that comes with a decent bead of puncture protection in there. Now, as well as your helmet and your position and your wheels, there are various other bits that can influence aerodynamics. There's the bike frame itself, which honestly doesn't have an enormous impact on aerodynamics. I mean, again, if you want to go all in, if you want to get the new Canyon Speed Max, I'm not going to stop you. But I think it's really important that we sort of look at this from a more sort of, realistic perspective and go, if I have limited money, if I don't have a bottomless bank account, if I have limited money to invest in this journey, do I really want to be spending money on the absolute top end bike frame? And my instinct would be no, go for a slightly cheaper frame and invest the money saved in wheels. Okay, that is where the gain is going to be. If you got the money, sure, go for it. Why not go for the absolute top of the range 10 grand bike, 12 grand bike? I'm not here to stop you. I'm not here to tell you how to spend your money. But what I will say is don't get drawn in by the marketing. Don't get drawn in by what the very top pros are riding. Okay, make the decision that's right for you. You can also look at all sorts of things like aerodynamic shoe covers and different sort of cable management systems and the like on the bike to try and make your cockpit as aerodynamic as possible. My instinct, especially with something like the shoe covers that's relatively cheap, is test it using Best Bike Split's Aero Analyzer, see how much of a difference it makes. See how much the sort of time you would save over the IRONMAN for the time spent fiddling around with the shoe covers in transition. And you can make your own decisions on sort of what works. There's also all sorts of bike upgrades that are less kind of aerodynamic and more about efficiency, such as oversized jockey wheels, ceramic bearings, all of these. Honestly, I don't think they're the best place to spend money. Will they improve your performance? Yes, marginally. But the maintenance, the level at which you need to replace some of these components, high-end bike lube, all of this, I don't think it necessarily adds up to sort of the money that's invested for most people. But then again, for you, maybe it does. Okay, next up, we are going to talk about bike handling. So, this is how you ride a bike. And this is something that is really neglected by an awful lot of athletes because they will do their structured training on the turbo trainer, which is sort of the right place to do it, really, especially if you're doing sort of harder intervals. However, what people really lack are sort of terrain management skills, the ability to ride the bike smoothly, the ability to be able to be in the right gear at the right time, to corner well, to descend well, to climb well. Because having the world's biggest FTP in the world, and right, you could be riding at the highest power of anyone out on the course. But unless you can actually ride that bike well, smoothly, cleanly, you're not going to be the fastest person out there. And the way that you do this is by spending more time riding your time trial bike outside. Now, I know this isn't easy for everyone living in every corner of the world. I know there are going to be some of you out there who are going to be screaming, no, Simon, you don't understand, it's not safe to ride on the roads out here. That there's no respect for cyclists, the roads are too busy, and I get it. But if you are lucky enough to have the opportunity to have quiet roads that you can ride on with your time trial bike, you need to make sure that you're doing this in race season. Your longer rides should be done outside. Some intervals should probably be done outside as well. When I set somebody a bike workout, I don't specify if it's indoors or outdoors most of the time. It's all about the athlete to go, okay, well, if I have a quiet piece of road, maybe I can have a go at riding the intervals outside. It is really valuable to spend time on the bike, and your aim with this work is to make sure that your normalised power is as close to your average power as possible. Now, your average power looks at the raw data, so it includes all the zeros for the time that you spend coasting. Whereas your normalised power, it looks at sort of removing the spikes and removing the coasting from your time. So I could go out on a ride, and if my normalised power was 280, my average power might be about 250, because I had all that time that spent coasting, stopping, all of that. Our goal as athletes is to have our normalised power as close to our average power as possible. And that means increasing the average power by spending more time at target. Now, once we have sort of got our target in mind, now Best Bike Split, haven't touched on this, but when you input all of your data into Best Bike Split, it will give you a time and it will say, okay, we believe that, on this course with this CDA and this FTP and this weight and this weather conditions, that you will get around the course in this time. And it then will give you a power plan which you download to your Garmin. And as you are riding, you have your power target in front of you while you're riding. As long as you stick to that power target, you should, as long as all the data that you inputted was good data. If it was bad data, then it's not going to work. If you stick to that data, then you should hopefully come in quite close to that best bike split estimation. Over longer races, the estimations do get a bit less accurate. The weather can change. There are all these factors, but broadly speaking, it's pretty good. And I recommend, if you are following these targets, that you have on the screen with your targets, you have your target power. Okay, my target is 180 watts. But also have your 5-second average power and your 30-second average power. The 30-second average power is the one that you probably want to be focusing on. You can't afford to stress yourself out for 5.5 hours by chasing this power number within a 5-second window. You need to zoom out a little bit, and you need to look at a 30-second average rather than focusing so much on, oh, gotta go harder, gotta go easier, gotta go harder, gotta go easier. Okay? Try not to micromanage your power so much, you will drive yourself nuts. Now, the more time that we spend at this target power, the faster we'll go. And Best Bike Split, it does have a maximum power that it caps you at. If you can tell it, look, I don't want to be going over 400 watts, or I don't want to be going 120% over my FTP at any point, it will include that in the plan. And on steep descents, it will probably also go, look, the amount of power you have to generate using your gearing to hold this power is unlikely, so we're going to actually incorporate some coasting into this. But we want to avoid getting to the place where we are coasting on sort of slight downhills. We want to avoid sort of surging and sprinting up to sort of to get up to power. Okay, we want to make sure that we are smoothly applying power and we are in control of the power that we generate. If you do a lot of riding on the turbo, again, there's nothing wrong with this, but switch erg mode off for some of your intervals. If it's a 1-minute interval, use erg mode, because by the time that you get and you hit your target power, you're going to be about 20-30 seconds into the interval by the time that you manage to really find that sweet spot for that interval, for most people at least. If you are doing sweet spot intervals, tempo work, FTP intervals, switch erg mode off. And instead, focus on being able to hold different power using your gearing, because that's what you're going to be doing on race day. You're going to be holding a power target, and you need to learn to hit these power targets without somebody holding your hand. Now, they say that smooth is fast and fast is smooth. What we really need to be doing is ensuring that our bike is as easy and as smooth as we can get it, while still hitting our targets. We are trying to hit speed, we are trying to create speed, not power. If we can get there and we can average 35, 36, 37 kilometers an hour without really trying, that is what we are trying to achieve. That is our objective. To be able to go as fast as we can. Power is great. Power is a fantastic training tool, and you need to use power to help you create a plan to be able to hit these times. You need it for your training. But on race day, speed is king, and we need to focus on being as efficient as we possibly can on the bike to ensure that we are getting the most out of our legs for each pedal stroke that we pedal. Because every bit of energy that we use on the bike is energy that we can't use on the run. Now, if you go too easy on the bike, you are going to give time away, and you're probably not going to be able to make that time back on the run. And sometimes finding the right intensity on the bike is a matter of trial and error, which is one of the reasons why it is very rare that somebody goes under 10 hours within the first year or two of racing Ironman. So I think that's us done for the bike. I haven't started the run yet, or nutrition, or strength, and I'm already nearly 90 minutes in. But if you're listening to this, you must be enjoying it, so I'm going to keep going. Now, the run is where you are really going to make or break your sub 10 hour target. This is where the chickens come home to roost. This is where all of the mistakes that we have made are going to come back to bite us. And trust me, over an Ironman, you are going to make mistakes. I'm not going to try and pretend that there is the perfect race take on an Ironman, that anyone has ever had a perfect race. I mean, you could look at Lucy Charles at Kona in 2023, gun to tape, world champion. You could say, oh, that was the perfect race. But there were a number of things that she wished she had done differently there, even though she won the biggest race in the world. You're going to make mistakes over your day, and these mistakes are going to be most sort of notable on the run as pacing errors, nutrition, all of these things, any sort of tightness or niggles that we've started to develop. These are all going to be the most notable on the run. And the first kind of 5k of an Ironman run is always a little bit nerve-wracking for me, because this is where we really start to find out what kind of day it is that we're going to be having. It doesn't help either that this is going to be at the hottest time of the day. If an Ironman starts at, for the sake of argument, 7 a.m. in the morning, then by the time that we've swum an hour and we've ridden for about 5 hours, we're going to be starting the run early afternoon. The sun is going to be beating down on us, we're going to be hot, we're going to be tired. Our legs are going to be tired. Look, I know I've talked about taking it easy on the bike, but we're still riding 112 miles. We start the run fatigued. How fatigued we start the run is going to have a real insight and influence onto sort of how the rest of the run goes. I know that sounds really obvious, but if you feel really poor when you're starting the run, the chance you'll be able to come back from that, it's not low, but it's not a great start, is it? Now, you are going to have a lot of highs and a lot of lows in the marathon. I'm not going to try and tell you otherwise. You know, that would be just lying to you. You're going to have times when you feel really good and you feel you bang on and the target pace feels easy. And there are going to be moments when you feel awful. It feels like you're clinging on to your pace target by your fingernails. And you just want this to be over. You just want to get to that finish line. And this is completely normal. The emotions that you go through over an Ironman, but especially an Ironman marathon, they are extreme, and they're one of the reasons that people keep coming back. They're one of the reasons you're considering going under 10 hours is because you love it at the end of the day. But we do need to prepare for a lot of dark moments, and we need to make sure that we have positive reinforcements in place. We need to make sure that we trust in our plan, in our nutrition, and that we've done everything that we can on the bike to set ourselves up for success. What I don't want people to do on the bike is to go, oh, you know, I think I'm going to up my target by about 10 watts because I feel that I can handle it, and then get on the run and find themselves walking before they got to the halfway mark and thinking, yeah, this is going badly. Now, to help set us up for the absolute best run possible, the key is actually bike fitness. And I know I'm labouring the point here. It's probably the fourth time I've mentioned this, but it really is the key message. If you can come off that bike feeling good, you're going to have a great marathon and run much faster than runners who are faster than you, but who pushed too hard on the bike. So if you're in doubt as to whether to focus on bike fitness or run fitness, generally speaking, bike fitness is probably the place to focus. Not suggesting for a moment that we should let our run fitness fall by the wayside. Not at all. We need to run lots. We need to run hard. We need to make sure that we have the foot speed to be able to complete the marathon within our target. However, what we don't want to do is we don't want to find ourselves at the point where we're doing 30-kilometre long runs, where we are running hard 2 to 3 times a week, where we're so focused on the marathon that we are neglecting our bike fitness, which is not only leaving us with a slower bike split, but we're also going to be more tired starting that run. Now, when we are doing our run training, long runs are obviously important, but long runs are overrated because of the fatigue they generate in our legs, because of the injury risk that comes with them, and they just don't provide people with the benefits to the level that they think they will. Now, if I were to head out and to do sort of 2 runs a week and a long run on the weekend, that's decent, but I'd much rather somebody runs 4 or 5 times a week and have the long run on the weekend less long, because overall volume of training is what is going to help you with your bike and your run fitness, to be honest. Somebody who trains for 25 hours a week is probably, assuming that everything else has been managed correctly, going to be faster than somebody who trains for 15 hours a week. And having that time on feet, having the ability to be able to train injury free consistently, is going to massively help. When I did the London Marathon a few years ago, my longest run was about 23, 24 kilometres. But I still set a big personal best. To be honest, my previous time at London, I had a large amount of walking in, so it didn't take much to beat it. But the idea that you've got to have these really long runs to prepare yourself, it's not true. I just ran 10 kilometres most days, had some intervals in there, built that base. And that is where run performance comes from. Yes, we do, of course, need to have hills. We need to have threshold sessions. I like to include some running races within my triathlon training. That is important, but just the sheer volume of running is what is going to make the biggest difference. Because when you come off that bike, when you start running with tired legs, you want to feel, although you're tired, okay, here we go, I know how to do this. I do this so often, I don't even have to think about it. I'm just turning the feet over. Now, the rate of perceived exertion while you're running should be similar to that of when you were cycling, really. It's not a case of, right, okay, here comes the marathon, time to push. I definitely don't want you to get to the end of the second lap and think, great, okay, if it's a 4-lap run course, think, okay, halfway through, let's pick it up a little bit. Let's see if we can get even faster. No, if you've never been sub-10 before, stick to the plan. You need to do the minimum that you need to achieve your goal. Sure, once you get into the last couple of miles and you know it's pretty much nailed on, if you want to pick it up, I'm not going to stop you. What I don't want people to do is to get ahead of themselves, think, great, I'm ahead of where I expected to be at this point. The bike was a lot faster than I expected. I had a great swim. I'm going to finish it off with a great run, because that is how you run the risk of it all going up in smoke. Now, when you are out there are going to be a lot of thoughts that are going to be going through your head at different points in the run. It really is a battle between the mind and the body. Sometimes it could be the mind saying, let's go faster. Sometimes it could be the mind saying, I need a walk break. And knowing when to listen to these voices and when to sort of stick to what you're expecting, it can be really difficult. And it comes with experience and knowing your body from all the hundreds of thousands of hours of training that it takes to get to the point where you can go sub-10. And it's also going to involve go through some of these periods in other Ironman races as well. Often, when you think to yourself, I really need this walk break through this aid station. Now, when I'm coaching Ironman athletes to their first finish or just, a PB sub-12, I will tell them, look, you really need to sort of, if in any doubt whatsoever, walk the aid stations, use the portaloo, take your time. It's better to make sure that you cross that finish line than try to be a hero and push on through. But if we have a performance goal, we do need to realign this. We do need to ask ourselves, is it really possible for us to be able to keep running instead of having to slow down to a walk? Now, this is going to depend largely on how deep you are into the race. You may well be able to run through the aid stations and just grab what you need when you're in the early stages of the run. As you get onto the third and fourth lap, you may find that you maybe do take a little walk break through the aid station. Something I will say, it depends on the individual, but for some people, as soon as they start walking, it's very difficult to get out of that mindset. And it's very sort of easy for them to take another walk break at the next aid station. And if you're walking every single aid station, and you haven't got, a reasonable cushion, then you are going to find yourself running the risk of being in trouble, I'm afraid. So you really need to focus on sort of making the right decision for you, and you're the only person who can really make that decision. It's going to depend on how you feel on the day. But if you are suffering with any sort of gastrointestinal issues, it is important that you address those rather than just trying to push on through, because chances are they're just going to get worse if you just try and sit there at race pace without addressing them. Now, with regards to equipment, there's route and strategy and pacing. There's not nearly as much of variation as there is on the bike. The bike, you've got hills, you've got the bike itself, you've got all the equipment. There's a lot of pieces that you need to optimize to put yourself in the strongest position possible. The run is much more about fitness. But on the subject of equipment, if you're looking to go sub 10, get yourself a pair of super shoes. I know that you may have a sort of a questionable stance on them, or I'm not sure if they're fair, but the fact is, if you are not, you could well be giving away, 3, 4, maybe 5 minutes on the run, perhaps more in some situations. And you cannot afford to leave that kind of time on the table. Yes, they're expensive. The grand scheme of an Ironman, they're not, but for a pair of running shoes, they are. And yes, they don't last for that long, but if you have already put so much into this race day, then you just need to make sure that you are getting the most out of every single opportunity for speed, and that is going to involve super shoes. But you do need to practice with these in training. Again, the ideal situation, and this may not be within your means, is that if somebody gets one pair sort of 4 or 5 months out and does a few sort of road races in them to get used to them, maybe do some intensive workouts, not that many, and nothing that's too technical. Maybe do some hard workouts, and then the race itself, go and crack that out and see how you get on with them. See if you start getting blisters, whether you start getting calf pain. There are all of these issues that can come with super shoes. But we do need to be mindful of making sure that the shoes that we're putting on at the start of the Ironman marathon, we know are going to work for us. We cannot afford to do all of our training in one pair and then switch to a pair of super shoes for race day and find out that we can barely run in them at all. Now, when you lay it all out like that, it all sounds relatively simple, doesn't it? You think, oh, well, all I need to do is get my FTP up high enough that I can hold a low intensity factor on the bike and still average the speed that I need to, then be able to run a strong marathon. And the strong marathon comes from lots of time on feet and some speed work, as well as, having a regular check-in with a swim coach and doing lots of long and hard swims. And yeah, I mean, a lot of people do tend to overcomplicate it. Of course, don't get me wrong, there is still a lot going on there, but not nearly as much as some people would have you believe. And something I try to do with the athletes I coach is to keep at least the sessions themselves, just try and keep it simple. Don't try to reinvent the wheel. Don't try to flex how much you know, how good you are as a coach by giving somebody an overly complex workout, okay? There's a time and a place for a complex workout, but for the most part, a lot of athletes, they just want to head out, they want to do an hour easy run, they want to listen to a podcast or an audiobook, and they just want to while away their time during this session. They don't want to have to be focusing on doing 12 different intervals of varying intensity within a fairly easy workout. The issue is that the sessions that we're doing, they only make up on a weekday for an Ironman athlete, normally between sort of 90 minutes, maybe 2 hours on a weekday, depending on how close you are to a race. It could even be an hour. But it's what you do with the rest of the day that has a real impact. So it's how much sleep you're getting, what's the quality of that sleep like, it's what you're eating, it is what you're doing with your time in the evenings. There are so many aspects to performance beyond what you do in the sessions, and it is so important to make sure that you get those right, because with poor nutrition and poor sleep, you've got no chance of going under 10 hours. Not only this, we've got strength and conditioning, and we've also got our race day nutrition. Now, I've talked about strength and conditioning a lot over the last month or so. If you want to learn more, I did a 3-part series on it if you look through the episode history. So I touched on it briefly here, but if you want to train to go under 10 hours, then you are going to want to be doing strength work. I'm not going to say you need to be doing strength work, because there are people who've gone under 10 hours who haven't done strength work, but the vast majority of them who want to create a body that is resilient enough to handle all of the training they're going to throw at it will be including strength work in their training, because they can't afford to get injured. They want to make sure they're rock solid when they're running, when they're swimming, when they're cycling. They're generating the power that they need to hold that high wattage on the bike. They are doing, they are becoming the complete athlete. And as soon as you get an injury that means that you have to take a week out from training, that 10-hour Ironman, it's hanging in the balance. I'm not saying the dream is over. That would be sensational, overly sensational for me to say that. But if you do find yourself with taking a large amount of time off of running, especially, that's where a lot of injuries occur, you are going to struggle to meet your goals on race day, especially if it was looking a bit marginal that you complete them anyway. So how do we go about this? Where we do 1 or maybe 2 45-minute strength sessions in a week. And honestly, as you may have heard me say before, I'd much rather that if you cannot fit it in your calendar anywhere, that you drop a 45-minute easy run to do some strength training instead, because that is going to have a far greater impact on your race day performance. Race day nutrition, also a massive subject. And I'm already 1 hour 40 into this episode. I cannot afford to sit there and to go through race nutrition in depth. But there's one major takeaway that I want you to have from this. And it's eat as much as you can on that bike, especially. On the run as well. Obviously keep yourself fueled up. But the athletes who tend to perform the best are the ones that consume the most amount of carbohydrate per hour. But there is more to this, because the amount of carbohydrate you consume, it can be limited by the intensity you're riding at. So if we were talking about 2 athletes riding an intensity factor of 0.7 or 0.75, the athlete riding an intensity factor of 0.7 will be able to better digest the food. The lower the heart rate, the more energy the body can direct towards the digestive system. And the more carbohydrates per hour you will be able to take on, giving you more energy and less chance of stomach upset. So that's another reason to just try to train yourself to ride at that low intensity factor as efficiently as possible. On the run, obviously, it's a bit more tricky to take on calories. That's why you do need to experiment a little bit more. It's why it's helpful to have, at least, 1 or 2 Ironmans in the bank before you take on a project like this, to learn how your body works at that stage, what it is that you're craving. I often say to people, if you're doing a really big brick session, ask yourself by the end, what is it that I'm dying for right now? What is my ideal food? Make sure you've got some of that in your special needs bag. When we're trying to go sub 10, we don't want to rely on the special needs bag if at all possible. We don't want to have to be stopping. We don't want to have to wait for a volunteer to bring us a special needs bag and to go through it and grab what we need. But nonetheless, I'd much rather that you have the option there, so that you can go and you can grab the special needs nutrition or replacement parts, whatever it is that you need, to have it on you, so that you can sort of overcome this sort of rough patch that you're going through nutritionally, than not have any access to that available whatsoever and only have access to what's on course. Now, on-course nutrition is currently at least pretty good at Ironman races in Europe. I know that in the US they're having some issues with mortal hydration, well, the athletes are at least. But over in Europe, things seem to be between Morton gels and the Precision Fuel and Hydration being the primary nutrition available. You should be able to get by with those products on course, and if you can, that is ideal. Because you want to be able to fly through an aid station to just grab something you're familiar with that you've hopefully used in training and used it to fuel your effort. What we cannot afford for you to do is to be sort of trying to pack as much food on the bike as possible, and that as soon as you lose a bit of your nutrition, then you find yourself in a massive hole. You want to be able to try to train your body to use the nutrition available on course. If you can't do that, it just becomes a lot more complicated. You have to make stops for special needs bags. There is an enormous amount of inconvenience that comes with this. But equally, if you cannot stand the nutrition on course, then you do need to go down that route. And you might want to look at different ways to transport nutrition around with you. And this requires building up a nutrition plan and making sure that you have the access to enough equipment on your bike to be able to carry the nutrition that you need for you to be able to get around your 5.5 hours. Ideally with some wiggle room. So a lot of tri bikes have lots of space in them for storing spares, liquids, bladders built into them. If you go for one of these bikes, that is ideal, because it allows you to fit a bunch of nutrition in there. If you can't stand the stuff they're giving out on course and you've got no other option, then in the area of the bike that is normally full of, it's empty, and you normally stuff it full of spare parts for the bike, just stuff nutrition in there. And maybe you do need to pull over at some point to open it up and deposit that nutrition into your pockets. It might lose you a minute tops to do that, but it's much better than suffering through nutrition issues. When you're preparing for your sub 10 Ironman attempt, you can afford to leave no stone unturned. You really need to do research into all of these areas surrounding performance. Not just what it takes, to swim, cycle and run effectively, the best bikes, sort of that sexy, interesting stuff. A lot of stuff that really makes the difference is boring. It's dull. It's quite monotonous. It's not headline material. And the reason is that the most successful athletes out there, especially in endurance sports, are successful because they've put in so many hours in prep. Now, when you see the very best athletes out there in Ironman and other endurance sports, the reason that they can race so quickly, but also at a low intensity, is because of the volume of training they've put in. And it's an interesting inverse relationship, because those who put in the least amount of hours in their training are going to be out there for longer on the race course. And so they actually make their lives harder on race day. Whereas those who have put in a bunch of training, worked really hard in the build-up, are going to have a much easier day than those who have neglected their training. Now, this isn't to say that it's going to be easy at all. It's not. But if you are looking to go under 10 hours at an Ironman, then the race itself should be a celebration of the training that you've done, rather than a day where you hope it all comes together and you manage to pull a rabbit out of the hat, It really is, if you've done all the prep work, if you've got your aerobic fitness where it needs to be, if you've researched the course, if you've got as aero as you can be, if you have done all the work that's needed, then I'm not saying it's hard to mess it up, because we all make mistakes, but as long as that groundwork is there, that there is the most important thing. A sub 10 Ironman isn't the kind of thing that you can heroically attempt and throw yourself at. Very few people are going to be surprised that they got that kind of result. They're going to be, yes, I went under 10 hours because I worked really hard for it. I left no stone unturned, and I went through every single piece of information I could get my hands on to help me achieve this goal. And this is the result of all of my hard work. Now, because this is the kind of goal that is so mathematical, we can use best bike split to be able to work out what our bike split should be. We can get a very good idea of our swim time in most cases, and we can train our running at a pace that we feel we can hold on race day. It's very easy to think, okay, well, where's the perfect plan to help me with this? Where all of the run targets and the bike targets are going to be ideal and perfect for somebody who's training for a sub 10 hour Ironman. Well, I'm afraid that such a plan does not exist. There are plans out there that are for people who are trying to achieve this goal, and they are no doubt very good plans that are aimed at the average athlete who wants to tackle this challenge. But if you have other commitments, which means that you can't train on the days that they want you to train, if it is that you are a surprisingly weak cyclist and you really need to work on your bike, if you need more guidance with the nutrition than you're able to find from just a program, if you have more limited hours than most people that these plans are aimed for, okay, this is where they can come up short. And sure, there is a lot that you can do to help sort of tweak that plan. Okay, well, the session that's supposed to be on Saturday, I'm going to move that to Friday because I finished work a bit earlier that day and I can get that done and then do a shorter session on the Saturday where I have more time with the family. You can move things around, it's not the end of the world. But there is also definitely an element of, if you want to take on a challenge like this and you've already invested a huge amount of time and money and energy and so much of yourself into this project, of just going, look, I need to find someone to help me with this. Now, the role of a triathlon coach really is a project manager. And this is never more true than when you're helping somebody prepare for a sub-10 Ironman, because that person is going to need a real team around them of people to help them. Whether we're talking about bike fitters, aerodynamicists, swim specialists, physios, when somebody has a goal like this, you really have to make sure that you're putting them in front of the right people to help them to make sure that they achieve their goal. And it's about balancing every aspect of that person's performance, making sure they're spending their time correctly, making sure they're spending their money in a wise way, and just generally being there to reassure them when things get really hard, when it gets tough, when the doubt creeps in, pulling up the data, running the reports, that helps to reassure them that they're on the right track. Now, just about every single athlete that starts working with a coach is going to improve, because there is only so much that you can achieve when you are training by yourself. Now, if you are looking to achieve a sub-10 Ironman, this involves a lot of research. You have to learn a huge amount. And it's just not possible to sit and to go through all this information, spend half their life on the internet trying to get hold of the answers to all of these questions that they have, when that's time that they should be spent training. And instead, I hire someone like me to take care of the program, to take care of the nutrition, to take care of the strength. By the way, if you are looking to take on a sub-10 Ironman, you do want to make sure that you have a coach who's qualified in more than triathlon, somebody who has qualifications in nutrition and in strength, because these are such important aspects, and it generally sort of helps keep the cost down. And speaking of costs, yes, triathlon coaching itself is not amazingly cheap. But when you consider it to the costs involved with attempting a sub-10 attempt, it could end up being less than 10% of your budget. To work with someone like myself who can help steer you through all the obstacles that are going to appear on the journey, make sure the training plan is built around you and is optimised around you, your performance, and what it is you want to achieve. Now, is it a luxury? Yes. But also, is training for a sub-10 Ironman attempt a luxury? Also a big yes. So we really do want to make sure that we're keeping things, in perspective here. There are some people who they would never want to work with a coach anyway. They'd much rather do it all themselves. And fair enough, good luck to them, I say. But I would go so far as to say that most athletes who go sub-10 probably work with a coach. And a lot of these are also high-functioning executives. They're people who have good jobs, which helps them to afford everything required to be able to put in an attempt like this. And it's quite interesting because a lot of people can be quite resistant to the idea of coaching. Oh no, I don't want to coach. I want to do it all myself. I want to figure it out. And again, like I said a minute ago, there's nothing wrong with that. But a lot of the clients that I work with are people who are, can be quite senior in large companies. And they are the ones that also tend to be most receptive to coaching and the ones that get the best results, hands down. The athletes who think they have the right idea they tend to be the ones that struggle. Whereas the ones who are very open to it tend to get on an awful lot better and they have better results. And I do think that a part of that is, when you work in a large business, you delegate tasks, you hire consultants, you take people on in exchange for their expertise and their time. And it's that kind of high performing at work mindset that they apply to their Ironman training that allows them to achieve exceptional results. So while there's no real right or wrong answer, whichever approach you want to use, that is completely up to you. But I just want to make sure that you don't end up in this place where you go, okay, I'm going to go and I'm going to attempt a sub 10 Ironman, I'm going to do it all myself. And they go out and they start doing the training and they don't see the results that they were hoping for. They find themselves behind schedule, really, of where they expected to be. And so, with about 6 months to go, they reach out to a coach and they go, I've been training for this goal and I feel I need a little bit of guidance. I can sometimes look through their training data and their numbers, and I think to myself, if they had just come to me when they started training, they could have been, emphasis on could have been in a much stronger position. But by trying to have that ego element of it, they try to, I'm going to do it myself, they end up sort of wasting time, really. They're giving away time by training in a sort of inefficient manner. Now, that could be that they've done way too much volume at the start. It could be done way too much intensity. It could be that they've simply chosen an inappropriate goal given the time frame. But by leaving it that bit too late in the day, that is what can really scupper people's chances. So as I record this in early November, this is the ideal time if you are looking to take on a challenge such as this next year to reach out to myself or another coach and say, look, I've got this really big goal, this big, hairy, audacious goal of a sub 10 Ironman, and I need some help because I want to make sure that I go about this absolutely the right way. This is the time to do it, not waiting until you've only got 4 or 5 months left to go until race day and expect some coach to come along and sprinkle pixie dust over you. In those situations, some coaches will just tell you to jog on because you should have come to them a long time ago. If I believe there's a chance I could help that athlete achieve that, then yeah, I might agree to work with them to help them to at least give themselves the best chance possible, but I'll never be able to make any guarantees. And it's always foolish to make any guarantees about results that any athlete could get with any coach. But if you want to make sure that you are setting yourself up for the best chance possible of achieving this, then hiring an expert to help you with this goal is absolutely the right way to go. And as I said earlier, it might be less than 10% of your overall budget. So I do believe this is the record for the longest podcast I've ever recorded. It's probably going to be 2 hours by the time that I wrap this all up. I've had to take a lunch break during the recording of it, done lots of research, okay? It has been a bit of an endeavour to get to this point. But I hope that you're thinking that this is less of a ramble. Well, it's been a little bit of a ramble at points, let's be honest. But I hope that you're really feeling informed, that if this is the kind of goal that you've been deciding, could I achieve that? That's given you a clear idea of what may and may not be achievable for you to reach in the next year. Now, if in doubt, I always recommend that you turn this into a multi-year project. If you're on the fence about going sub 10, you're not sure if you can do it or not, and you throw yourself at this challenge for a year, and you end up coming in about 10:30, well short. But you've made so many sacrifices throughout the year and you're so emotionally invested in it that you get that finish time and you just feel broken and lacking in purpose and all of these negative emotions that can come off the back of that. That's not a great feeling. Whereas if you say to yourself, look, within the next 2 or 3 years, this is my target, and I really need to make sure that I'm setting myself up as best I can. If your PB is around 10:45, acknowledging that to get those last 45 minutes off of your time can end up taking an awful lot of time. And as I referenced at the start, as we get older, this is still possible, But the time it takes to shave those last minutes off of your time is going to take longer than if you were in your 20s or your 30s, because that's just biology. So again, if you are a bit older, you can probably still achieve this, but you are going to need to look at it from a longer lens. You are going to need to go, right, I need to plan this carefully, I need to be really conscious, I need to be really mindful of how I can improve my fitness in the long term without burnout or getting injured. And I guess if I had one take home message for you, it would be that this is such a long game. You may need to spend 3 or 4 years building your base fitness before you can even get ready to attempt something like this. Some people, if they have an athletic background in other sports, accomplished runners, it may not take them nearly as much time. But equally, if you've been listening to this as somebody who is just hoping to complete their first Ironman and who could never dream of going around the 10-hour mark, is to say to yourself, well, what's stopping me from achieving something like this with enough time? Because if you invest in yourself, if you put in the training, if you put in the work, if you do all the learning, chances are there's nothing realistically that's going to stop you from achieving these things other than that element of self-doubt. Oh no, that's not for people like me, that's for racing snakes. That's for him, that's for her. And yes, as I touched on at the start of the episode, there is a level of privilege involved to have the time, the money, the general resources, the goodwill to be able to train for something like this. But to really back yourself, because so many triathletes underestimate what it is they can achieve in the long term with efficient training. And that sometimes you just need to blindly back yourself and go, look, what is it that's stopping me from going sub 10 or qualifying for Kona or any of these fantastic achievements? Because we're very good at telling ourselves lies of reasons that we can't do things. But at the end of the day, sometimes you've got to dare to dream, to push your limits and find out just what it is that you're capable of. So I really hope you found that useful. If you are considering taking on a challenge like this and you'd like some more information or a bit of help, have a look down in the show notes. If you look through my website, there's all sorts of information down there. There's free courses, free resources, as well as some premium content as well down there. That will help you get in the best shape possible for triathlon to give yourself the best chance of achieving this goal. And if you're looking to take on a sub 10 Ironman and you would be interested in having some help from an expert such as myself, drop me an email. There are various services that I offer beyond simply my monthly coaching. Some of which I'd like to think are quite affordable. So don't feel afraid to reach out, send me a message, and you know what, we can see what it is that you're really capable of. Because I'm the kind of person, I'm not going to lie to someone. I'm not going to say, oh yeah, I can definitely get you sub 10, just sign up with me, we'll make it work. If I don't think it's going to happen, I'm going to tell you as such. But if you really believe you can do it, and if I believe that you can do it, let's see if we can make some magic happen together. And on that note, I would like to thank you for your company over the last 2 hours. I hope that it's made your car journey or trip to work or long run a lot more enjoyable, a bit more interesting, a bit of mental stimulation for you there. I hope you'll subscribe to this podcast if you found it interesting and useful. I share a wide variety of triathlon content every Tuesday morning. So do tune in. It's all focused around amateur athletes rather than professionals, so hopefully it should be advice that's more applicable to you. With that, I'm going to wish you the very best of luck with your training, and I'll see you all soon.